Hello, hello, hello. Happy November 11th, Veterans Day. If you have it off, congratulations. If not, I hope the day is going well for school for you, or the day went well, because this is hitting all of us at the end of the school day. For all of the veterans out there, thank you for everything that you do. This Ask Me Anything is a little bit different than in months past because I have succumbed to the cold that my kids have had for the last few weeks. Excuse me, that was not on cue. It was not on purpose. So I am recording a bit ahead of time to ask some of the great questions that have come in and point you towards other resources in case they are helpful. And as always, you can always reach out to us at Dataspire at support.dataspire.org, support@dataspire.org. Any way that we can help, we're happy to help. But I wanted to make sure that I could jump in and answer a few questions that folks have been sending us and asking us over time, building off of last week's strategy share out, where we were diving into what's the pattern, teaching students to see patterns in their data. Okay, last week we talked a bunch about how to introduce common patterns and help make sure our students understand what those common patterns are before we ask them to make sense of pattern in any given data set. The same way we teach our kids letters and the sounds and phonics, and then we teach them how to read and how to piece it all together. So how are we kind of creating those stepping stones for our students? And then also sort of expanding the way that we engage with different data visualizations. All of this relates to describe and analyze patterns of the myriad of different functions that we are working on when we are working with data. So yes, this relates to many other things, but we are focusing on patterns this month in the free strategy share out series. And so thinking about diving deeper into how do we help students really describe and analyze those patterns, like what is on the page, before we jump to, so what could it mean, and the interpretation that we would make with it going forward. And last week, you can check out the recording on our YouTube page. So last week we talked through, as I said, like ways to, adjusting the ways and the types of graph types that our students are practicing looking at patterns. We talked about chart each party up here behind me. It's a great way to do that. There are many other ways to do that, but sort of shaking things up and helping students come at it from a bit of a different angle. We talked about doing that gut check. Doing that gut check of, do our students know those common patterns before we ask them to identify and describe them? And then finally, sort of using annotations to strategically and repeatedly using annotations to help students identify those patterns and features. So kind of expanding the ways we're looking at data visualizations and then doing that gut check of, do our students know the patterns before we're asking them? But that's what we covered last week. Check out the video. It is live. Everyone can access that to see some of those strategies. But what we want to do today, is think about some of our questions. So like those were some strategies that we shared out last week, but what are some other questions or other pieces that we can think about as we're setting our students up for success when working with patterns? And as we talked about last week, right, pattern recognition is in our nature from when we were really, really little. So our youngest littles, early education kiddos can see the pattern of banana, strawberry. And therefore we are leveraging that sort of brain thinking and pathways and our natural inclination to see patterns, but we want them to be applying it to more complicated, nuanced, complex kind of visual components as we're helping them see those patterns. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is that we got a great question this week from a teacher that was asking, like, well, at what grade level should we expect students to start to be able to identify patterns independently? check out the video from last week where we talk about the 5 common patterns. This is a great question. Like, those are the common patterns. One of the things that we talked about was, okay, gut check. Do they know those common patterns? But then we also need to gut check ourselves as facilitators of those learning experiences to be like, when am I supporting them and helping students identify the patterns and giving them the language versus when are we asking them to do it themselves? And this, I was reminded of this a lot last week when we were talking to a fourth grade team last week, and they were talking about this transition in elementary school where you learn to read and then you learn how to read and then you read to learn content, and that this is a shift that happens in upper elementary school for our students. And yes, when they're little, they're still certainly learning content, getting exposed to things while they're reading, but the emphasis is really on learning how to read. We can think about it similarly with patterns. So our younger elementary students, or sort of K through 3s, they are learning how to read a pattern, but we are sitting there and supporting them and giving them cues and helping them understand what those patterns might be and helping them, decide between 2 and different things like that. As opposed to starting around 4th, 5th grade, our students should be shifting into a place where they could independently read the data visualization of, our simple patterns, make sure it's grade appropriate, but our simple patterns of we can expect them to independently identify those patterns. And then we just build from there. So starting around 4th, 5th grade is when we want to sort of really expect the majority of our students to being able to independently identify different patterns as they're coming through the data visualizations that we're seeing. Now, can they do some earlier? Yes, absolutely. Can our students in 2nd, 1st, 3rd grade talk about which is more and which is less? Yes, 100%. And that gets to what are the patterns that we're asking for in the different grade levels as our students are going through, which is a good reminder that what we talk about in terms of patterns differs across different disciplines, sort of generally in the world, across different disciplines, or what we ask for in math. This obviously expands as our students are going through their math pathways, what we ask for in science. But I bring this up just reminding us to think about, like, we use the word patterns to mean many different things, and we expect different kinds of responses as our students are progressing K to 12 as it results in patterns, right? We're not expecting our seniors to only see what our kindergartners can see in the patterns. They're both looking at patterns in the data, but we want that senior in high school to be more nuanced and is looking at more complicated data visualizations, and therefore it's going to have a wider range of kind of the patterns that are in that data visualization. And they're senior in high school. We expect like a little bit more than just surface level understanding. So another question we got were, what prompts or guiding questions work best to get students talking about patterns in data? And so want to kind of give a shout out to this advancing pattern recognition that's up here in the right-hand corner. I'll share a little bit more about that in just a moment, but sort of off the cuff, some ideas are, as you're looking at some of these common patterns, especially if you're sort of trying to get kids to see what's going on in the data as it is giving us information about the variable or variables that we are looking at, you could use prompts like as fill in the blank changes, like first variable changes, what happens to the other variable? This is a great one for our middle school and above where we're looking at multivariables. Or where do you see something staying the same, increasing or decreasing? So that stable, increasing, and decreasing are 3 of the common patterns that we talked about last week. Or are there any surprises in the data? So often our students can sort of focus in on one aspect, and it can be helpful to kind of pull them in to a different part of the visualization to have them think about and look at. And sometimes our students can come in with a perception of what they're going to see in the data. So asking them for surprises can be good to kind of get them thinking in a slightly different direction. So not just that confirmation bias of looking for what they want to see, but thinking about what they're actually seeing. Another one that can be really helpful for all of our students is having them describe what's going on in the visualization as if they were to describe it to someone else. Like I was just talking to my kids about this and they thought it was so hysterical, right? Where it's like, describe it to your grandmother, describe it to your 3-year-old brother, maybe not 3, to your 5-year-old brother, describe it to your cousin who's never seen it, describe it to your neighbor, all of these different things. But someone who, in essence, hasn't seen the visual, how would you describe what's actually going on in those data? And when we do that, that gets them really looking at what's going on in the data and not jumping to, what does it mean, or different pieces like that. They have to pay attention to, yes, all the sort of structure of what is the variable, what are the variables that we're looking at, but also look at actually that fine detail. Some of those things we were talking about with Charty Party last week and what affordances Charty Party allows us to have. So this is what I was talking about, the Advancing Pattern Recognition resource. It's a digital resource that you can access here, where we go through sort of by grade level and by kind of different visualizations, like what are the kinds of ways that we want to be talking about patterns at our different grade levels. How do we progress that over time? And I'll put the link to this in the comments for this recording. Whew, sorry. Thank you. This is why we're not going live, because Kristen runs out of breath. Okay, so a reminder, last week we talked about this visual processing and how we go through this visual processing every time we're taking in visual information, and therefore every time we are working with data visualizations, this also comes about. And it reminded me of a question that we got, which is, how can I help students go from describing what they see to explaining why the pattern might exist? Now, this might feel like sort of a funny connection to that question, but what immediately jumped out at me is the explaining why the pattern may exist is coming up here, is this visual cognition, where we are making sense of what we are seeing and connecting it to other things that we know, and getting into that sort of synthesis, higher order thinking. But our students, if our students are just describing what they see, they are down here. They are in the pattern recognition of what is it that I'm actually seeing on the page. And so if you are wanting your students to be here and they're hanging out down here, then I'd suggest one, looking at the common patterns discussion that we had last week in the video, and then two, thinking about how do I take whatever lesson you have and stair step it out a little bit, or sort of breadcrumb it out, maybe is a better way to say that, so that you are creating opportunity for them to identify the pattern, consider what that pattern is indicating to them about the variable or the variables, and then stepping into visual cognition of, okay, so what could it mean and why might that be the case? And so initially the thought, like why it made me think of this visual processing, is because it sounds like we're at different steps in the visual processing of the information. And part of that is it just comes with time. Like we have had a lot more time to build up our visual memory and our visual cognition so that we can apply that in a more plastic way to various different data sets, data visualizations that we are looking at. And our students are more novices and they are still working to build that up. So create that opportunity to kind of breadcrumb that in for your students to help with that pathway of, okay, we need to pause, we need to allocate time to describe and analyze the pattern, and then connect it to what we know about the topic, the phenomenon more broadly, and then we can get to like, well, why? Why might that be? Why might that be happening? Another way that we can get at that is sort of helping that stepstone is, one, we can change our prompts and we can lay out the prompts. And two, we can also have our students annotate the data, like we were talking about last week from the Draw on Your Graphs resource of sort of what are these different steps that we can do to actively annotate our visualizations to help our students either slow down, like we had in the last question of, they're only telling me the what, not the why. Like, okay, so let's slow down and look at all of the data pieces, or make sure we are breadcrumbing them through those data pieces. Another question that came in was thinking that also made me think of this annotate was the question of, my students can describe individual data points, but not the overall patterns. What should we do about that? And these 4 steps, there's a great thing that you can do on any data visualization you have that can help move students along on this progression. Moving along on this progression also is what we need to get at the why. So if we're stuck on the what, if we're focused on the what, and we're trying to move to the why, using these annotations can be another good step. So that question of like, they're just focused on describing individual data points, great. They're here. They're on this first step of highlighting individual cases. And you can even physically have them highlight those individual cases. But then if we want them to move to be able to look through all of the different data visualizations, we need to help them zoom out on the data visualization. So we need to move beyond just focusing on individual data points, which is where their eye naturally goes as novices. Excuse me, just a second. But we can use these steps of annotation of, okay, now focus on and physically draw around a subset of the cases, or physically draw a shape around all of the data. So what we're doing here is a variety of different things, but we're giving them a pathway to follow with these 4 steps of annotating the data. We're giving them a routine to use and to practice, and we're giving them ways to see different parts of the data and the patterns, get their eyes directed towards the kinds of things we pay attention to when we are working with the data. So all around, we are helping them sort of build out these data skills as they are also physically drawing on the visualization and making sense of it, sort of stepping through and realizing that they need to look at these different scales, at these different components of the data visualization in order to make sense of it, in order to get to that claim that they're trying to make, or a conclusion they're trying to draw, or the why that might be happening, because we can't say why from individual data points. But if that is where their eye is going, then how do we help step them through? So really encourage you to take a look at this Draw on Your Graphs resource, where we break it out sort of what those different steps are for a variety of different data visualizations. What could that look like? What would we be drawing in? This is a way you can pair this with the I² strategy, so identify and interpret, or with the notice, think, wonder. But this is a way to like actively get kids to connect those 2 pieces, from the like notice to think, or the, like I notice this and I think that, or I identify this and I'm interpreting it as that. That in between, that bridge cognitively has a lot going on. So check out this resource, the Draw on Your Graphs resource, as a way to help bridge that gap, or as a way to bridge they're jumping from conclusions, they're jumping to a conclusion without looking at evidence in the data. Well, if they're annotating the data, then they've got some pieces called out in their annotations that they could use as evidence, like they're identifying and drawing on different parts, different features of the data as evidence that they can use for their conclusion or their claim as they're going through. Okay. Last little bit. We got a range of questions that related to, wait here, let me pull up the questions. The questions were, How can data tools help students see patterns they might miss on paper? Or like, which I read is like, how can we use an interactive digital tool that might be different than a static visualization on paper? And what are some easy ways to have students kind of work with data, actively work with data to reveal the patterns? Fantastic, wonderful questions that our interactive tools really create different opportunities for than when our students are working with a static data visualization. So they're the good old Google Sheets and Excel that are on most of our computers in schools. These are spreadsheet programs we've round pegged into graphing programs. And then there's a suite of data visualization tools that are specifically designed to support students exploring and actively working with the data to reveal and uncover different data visualizations. In that this suite of tools, they can easily sort the data, filter the data, regroup the data, visualize the data in a variety of different visualizations. It's all about easy access to get students sort of moving through and working with the data and looking at data from a data set in different ways. This is a big part of sort of making meaning, sense making of what's going on in the data. Desmos is a fantastic graphing calculator that you can upload some data into, but it's a little tricky if you're only looking at one variable. It's really set up with the quadrant plots. It's a graphing calculator, online graphing calculator, which is great. Tinkerplots and Fathom have a lot of these exploratory data components to it with an emphasis towards the math. And then you can really get into lots of exploration in the data and different things. But the key is sort of picking a tool or a program that is one designed to enable students to make those active choices and then be able to sort of quickly move between them. And that's one of the real tricky things of the spreadsheet programs is it's hard to move between different visualizations without reorganizing how your data are organized and different pieces like that. But they're out there, and that's a great question of like, there is this interface between the tool that we have and how our students are making sense of data and the patterns in the data, different pieces like that. Okay. That was some questions that came in. They were great questions. Thanks for rolling with the me not going live so that I could go back to sleep and keep taking a nap to try to get over this head cold. I do want to say that voting is still going on. It ends this coming Friday. So please, please get your votes in. It's been so fun to see what everybody is voting for. In terms of what our new t-shirt should be, that t-shirt will be launching the week of Thanksgiving. So very, very soon it will be coming, and we're super excited to see what the community votes for. And next month, our strategy share out builds on this month's theme. So this month we are all about patterns, and next we will be thinking about diving into conclusions and claims. So the from what to aha, from so what to aha, guiding students to stronger data conclusions. So thank you for joining. Thank you for watching. Hopefully this answered, it at least answered some people's questions. If you have questions, always send them our way to support@dataspire.org, or I'll put in the link for our Ask Us form that you can always submit questions to. Otherwise, I look forward to seeing you all next month at our strategy share out, where we're jumping into data claims and conclusions. And again, thank you for your patience and understanding as I am sick and not doing this, answering these questions live, but I hope you are not sick, and I hope you stay healthy in the next few weeks, and that you have a wonderful, restful Thanksgiving break. Until next time, stay curious, keep exploring your data, and have fun.